Hello everyone. Today we will start with comparative politics in your paper 2. So let's quickly see what do we have to do here. So in comparative politics, the first thing that we have to understand and do is its nature. Now understand, when we say nature, it is one and the same thing as what we mean by features, or when we say characteristics. So these are one and the same thing. So in your syllabus, although nature is written, you should be able to write the same things in features or characteristics as well. The next that we have to do is approaches. So let's get into it. So how do we start comparative politics? We will first start comparative politics in its origin as one of the three major ways to study politics, or the political way, or the political science, whatever you call it. So first of it is political science, also known as political theories, or let's say political philosophy. These are one and the same thing. Then another way is to call it comparative politics, and the third would be your international relations or international politics. So when we talk about the nature of comparative politics, I'm not going to talk about this or this right here, because I hope that you have done this and this you will take up in subsequent classes. So just sticking to comparative politics, otherwise we won't be able to complete this whole on time. So to get in the nature, we have to understand that comparative politics is not a new thing. It is very, very old. How old? We know this, that Aristotle, around 2000 years ago, he was one of the first person that we know or we are sure of who went through lots of constitution, whatever there were the city states in Greece. So he went through the constitution of all those city states and compared those. So comparative politics is not a new phenomena, it is a discipline which is as old as your Greek civilization. So let's call this traditional traditional comparative politics. So obviously what will come in sharp contrast of traditional comparative politics, it will be called your modern comparative politics. So let's associate timelines. So what is traditional comparative politics? Let's call World War II as your pivot. So whatever we have before World War II, we can take it in traditional sense, and whatever we have after World War II, we can take it in the modern sense. And let's now come back to the question of nature, the features of comparative politics. So it will be different in both the cases, the traditional and modern sense. So let's try to analyze those. In traditional sense, we say that the nature of comparative politics is narrow. Narrow in what sense? Narrow in the scope. Let's try to understand what does this word narrow means. See, before World War II, what were the constituent units of the world? So world was either having colonies or colonizers. Colonizers will form what? Empires, big, huge empires. And this is what the way is. So even if you talk about the Roman civilization was a big empire having lots of, let's say, countries or nations embedded in its whole political architecture. So, do we see any independent political systems? So, no, we do not see any independent political system. What we see is that Western Europe, which in itself is somewhat homogeneous, they operate in the same way. So, if you are talking about France, France also went through a feudal system, so they will also have the dukes, they will also have the barons. So, if you talk about Britain, it will also have the same similar kind of way of organization. They will also have your dukes, they will also have your barons. You can't uh, compare these to China. China won't have this dukes and baron system. China will have something entirely different. Hence, it does not come under our object of study. When we are doing the traditional comparative politics, we are going to focus upon Western European countries, or basically their political system, and we are going to compare those only. So understand, there is not much that you can compare upon because they are approximately same. Are you Christian? Yes, I am Christian. Are you Christian? Yes, we are Christian. So society is almost similar. The political structure is also similar. So what are you technically comparing? You can only compare government here. What else? When you're talking about comparing constitution, and the written constitution is something that is still not a very, let's say, popular way. In Britain, it is still not a written constitution, it is an unwritten constitution. So technically what you are going to be comparing in traditional way is just the government. How is this government operating, how is that government operating, what else can you measure? You can see how the process is changing, you can see how the institutions are functioning, or the forms of the government. Okay, the legislative, executive, judiciary part, what not. And all this is embedded in what? In the constitution. What is constitution? Nothing but rules and regulations. They are rules and regulation agreed upon by all. So you are not taking into focus the input of society, the input of economy, input of, let's say your foreign policies. You are not going after that. So we hence determine that it is narrow in scope. Let's try to understand how does it change in the modern sense. See, in modern sense, after World War II, what will happen? The first thing that will happen is you will get a third wave of democracy, or let's say that a decolonized world emerged. Decolonized. So new independent, new plus independent political systems emerged, like those in Middle East or those in South Asia or like those in Southeast Asia. And one thing was, everyone was assured of one thing, there was this moment of realization when this occurred. Then there was this realization, okay, listen, my friends, my dear friends, I think that we, the political scientists, we have to go beyond whatever we are doing till up till now. We have to go beyond into what domains? We have to go into analyzing socio-cultural factors as well, socio-economic factors as well, because just studying the form of government is not enough, because we believe that democracy is the, let's say, the pinnacle of the forms of government or form of political way that a society can engage in. But no, that is not the case. Okay, you can't expect Middle East to have a democratic society when they do not have had that for past 2000 years. So it makes no sense, and that is why we come to Hamza Alvi, where she says overdeveloped. She gives her overdeveloped state concept when the society is yet not developed in democratic sense, but the system that is enforced upon it is a democratic one. So there is a gap, a deficit. Hence we see problems. What would be one prime example? One prime example would be Pakistan, or one prime example would be Afghanistan. The society is tribal. The system that has been enforced upon is a democratic one. Do people have the sense of what democracy is? No, they look for one supreme, divine, let's say, a leader. They have that tendency, they have that engagement. One of the reason why in 1857 revolt, everyone was quite, let's say, happy if, let's say, your Mughal king Bahadur Shah is leading, because they had that concept only in their hand. The Indians, the rebels, the soldiers who started the mutiny, they still had that concept in their mind instilled. They were not going for democratic reforms, or they were not asking for democracy. It was only later that the Swaraj concept would be developed. Okay, so if this all makes sense, comparative politics, nature we have to give in two ways, one traditional and one modern. What is the pivot point? Pivot point is World War II. So in nature, in traditional, what is the issue? It is narrow in scope. Narrow in scope. Understand? Comparative politics is a way. It is a discipline where we are trying to do comparative analysis. That is it. That is taking A and B and comparing them upon various parameters. More the parameters, more the parameters there are, better the comparison. The issue is that in traditional way, we do not have that many comparisons parameters. In modern, we have that many, let's say, comparable parameters. Why? The reason being a diverse world, independent political systems, not similar kind of political system, majority, major, very very different kind of diverse form of political systems are there, and diverse form of societies also, not your homogenic societies as of West, if that makes sense. Now in traditional, what would be your prime, let's say, method of analysis? So you can say this can be said as legal institutional. What does legal institutional means? Nothing but the same as your, let's say, comparing your constitutions, which is what comparative was all about in traditional sense, started with Aristotle. Okay, so when you go for the study of your Indian government and politics in your paper 1, that is nothing but an extension of comparative politics studies. Okay, when you are doing your domestic politics, what you are going to be doing there, you are going to analyze and study what is the object of study for you there, the Indian constitution. So IGP is nothing but extension of comparative politics. Okay, so with that said, let's try to come to the modern approaches that we have. Because when we are doing approaches, you have to understand in traditional way we have not many approaches, only one approach, that is you take one constitution, read all the rules, take another constitution, read all the rules, compare which rule is beneficial, which rule is doing good, which rule is implemented better. One point of comparison. So technically you can say that traditional comparative politics is essentially non-comparative, because you do not have those many parameters to compare upon. That is missing, not in the modern sense. And let's try to understand what are the modern approaches these days. Okay, so to understand that, we will study it in the following way. We will talk about the systems approach, where we will consider a system and we will define what a system is. And then there would be a, let's say if this is version 1, then this version is let's say done in detail. It has been made into a version 2.0, and this we will refer to as structural function approach. Structural functional approach. So before moving further ahead, we will do these two fatafat. Okay, so let's try to understand who comes up with systems approach and what is the nature, or let's say the need for that to occur. So understand, there is this one guy, David Houston, and understand the times. Uh, these are the times when political science is not able to answer any of the happenings that is occurring in the world. So people are thinking that by political science has now lost its way. It does not it is not able to answer any questions that we have. Okay, so people are going more towards sociological disciplines. Plus, at those times, understand these Niels Bohr, Einstein, they were all coming up with big theories, and everything was about science, especially after the end that we saw in World War II, which was based upon a nuclear science, nuclear science output. So, nuclear science came up with the answer to solve the crisis that was in the world, that was the World War. So understand the level of, or the standards that people had for science at that time. They would not consider anything that is less than science to have any sort of value in it. So there was this movement to make political science an actual science. How do you do that? By embedding into it scientific methods. When you embed scientific methods to your studies of political science, you are making it real science. This was the argument. And how do you incorporate scientific methods? Quantitative analysis. Quantitative, that is, you start measuring the GDPs, or let's say you start measuring the, let's say, some form of, let's say, electoral voting behavior. When you are doing these kinds of studies, understand it is possible for you to come up with a data with lots of different countries, let's say country 1, country 2, country 3, and you are saying GDP, or let's say constituency 1, constituency 3, constituency 4, and you are seeing who voted for whom, Muslim voted for whom, Hindus voted for whom, Sikhs voted for whom. Then you can come up with some kind of theory that you can give, or let's say you can have your theory get validations with those quantitative, let's say, analysis. You are saying that, see, I hypothesized this, this was my hypothesis, and my data evaluation, my data analysis is giving me the evidence that my hypothesis was correct. This is what was the attempt at those times, and this is called as behavioralism. Because understand, what is the one thing that you are trying to understand from the study of these data, the quantity, the quantitative analysis. You are trying to understand the behavior behavior of what? Behavior of the system, behavior of the individual, behavior of the people, that is citizen. Okay, if that is making sense. Now, systems approach. What would be the aim of systems approach? So aim would be to give a scientific model. You have the aim would be to give a scientific model for what purpose? For your political analysis. This is the whole discipline that we are studying. We want to give a justification as to why a particular political phenomena is occurring. For this, we have to do what? Political analysis, and for that analysis, we have to use a certain tool. What is our tool here? A scientific model we are using. And when we say scientific, understand, it is value free. We do not care how I feel about it. I do not care about how people feel about it or how the state feel about it. We are just going to look at the reality just on the basis of data. This is what the aim was. Who would be our prime influence in the development of this theory, the systems approach? So we can say at that time, when this theory in political science, the systems theory in political science was being developed, in the discipline of sociology, Talcott Parsons came up with a, let's say how Charles Darwin came up with a grand theory of evolution. Similarly, in sociology, Talcott Parsons came up with a theory of social systems. The system itself comes from the general system theory, a general model of analysis, how you can basically analyze anything if you can think of it in a system. Similarly, when you go into environmental studies, you say this is an ecosystem. You make a boundary and you say, okay, this water body is an ecosystem. Why? Because it has this, that you know what is there in a system. So let's try to first define a system. What would be a system? So a system would be nothing but elements which are in constant interactions, and you consider it in a closed box. You can think of it as multiple systems. Let's say this element here in this system is part of another system that works here, and this can have this interaction, and you say that this is another boundary. So if you think about it, this particular element is a part of this system as well as this system. This is a general system. Elements plus interactions. That is it. Now understand, in this diagram, how do you differentiate the two system? This is system 1, this is system 2. How do you differentiate the two system? Why can't I say that this is one system? Why can't I say this? Why am I saying that this is one system, this is second system? So we have to be able to differentiate the system. So how do you do that? So the general explanation in the system theory is that every system will have a unique function. So let's say if this system 1 is able to give me a unique output, it performs a unique function, and this system performs another unique function, then I would say that this system 1 is a differentiated system. It is a system basically. Differentiate means that we are saying that this is a system. How do you say that you are one person, not two person? So you can say that one person has two eyes, so I have two eyes, therefore I am one person. Let's say you have four eyes, then I would say that you are not one person, you might be two persons. This is a rubbish example that I've said, but you get the point. You have to differentiate it. Okay. Now understand. Here we are trying to talk about not system but political systems. What is systems? System is elements plus interactions. Interaction to what? Other elements. So understand what are the elements in political systems. That is it. System means elements plus interaction. When we say political, we are basically talking about the elements. We have defined what the elements are. So let's talk about what those elements are. In political system, we would say elements could be your, let's say, state, economy, institutions, whatnot, society. There is no limit. Interactions could be different kind, and many scholars have given different kind of interaction. We will see what interaction here we have. But before that, we said that any system can be called a system only when it performs a unique function. So if I call a system a unique system, which is called a political system, what is the unique function that this system is performing? A political system. So this is where David Houston come, and he says that the unique function that the political system would be providing is authoritative allocation of values. And when we say values, do not go into your Indian mentality of having values in terms of honesty, integrity. No, value in sciences could be anything. 0, 1 could be value. Okay. So here what we are talking about is, we are talking in terms of resources. Authoritative allocation. Nobody can challenge. This is the supreme decision. Supreme decision. Once decided, it is done. It is not for you to like not uphold. You will have to uphold the decision. That means authoritative would mean at the same time having power to punish. That is, this is not just any kind of decision. It is a binding decision. Binding decision. Binding decision over the distribution of resources. You can think of it in that term. Okay. Now, David Houston's system approach. So when we do this kind of analysis, what we consider is we take a system. Let's say this is a political system of India, and what we would have elements in it, and these elements will interact amongst each other, and we are going to uh, come up with ways how any interaction is influencing another interaction, or let's say we would try to find some patterns in these interactions. This is what the study is all about. So let's try to make sure we define this system properly. So let's have few more key words. So let's say if there could be a system, there could be a subsystem as well. Now subsystem can also be called as environment. Now what is the subsystem or environment's role? They impacts the main system. What is your main system? The political system. They impacts your political system, that is the main system. So in any subsystem that is impacting the political system, that is the main system, we will call it environment. So there must be a maxima or minima of that environment, that is the limits to that environment. These limits to those subsystem is what we will call as boundary. When you write the answer about systems approach, you just have to mention these. Okay, now let's try to understand the system, David-Euston system. So let's say this is Indian political system. Indian political system. So David-Euston says that there will be input, the system will take an input and it will give out an output. Now the question comes is how many input and how many outputs. So there are two kinds of input, one in the form of demand. There would be some demand from the political system, whatever the system is, and there would be some kind of support. For better understanding, you think of it as you demand certain thing from the state, and then you support the state yourself as well. How? In the form of, let's say, taxes or labor. When you vote, you are voting for a particular mm public policy that the manifesto contains. Okay. Similarly, the output can be a single decision, a single law. When we talk about in terms of those unitary, let's say, rules, we are saying that we come out with a decision. But let's say the society is very, very diverse. We have to cater to everyone individually. There should be, let's say, if a person is SC, if a person is ST, if a person is OBC, if a person is not economically viable, or let's say doing good, economically weaker section, or let's say normal general people, different policy prescription we have to give. So in this category, we say what we are giving is a policy, that is multiple decisions. Okay, so understand if this is clear. Now think, how would traditionalist view this systems theory given by David Houston? They would say that obviously you are making things unnecessary complicated. Why are you making things unnecessary complicated? To say or to come at a conclusion, you are saying that political system works like a system which has input, it gives output, so we have to make sure and understand that these inputs we understand properly, then only we can come to some output. Then when you were let's say when you were asked that how is there a way, let's say if the output that comes is not favorable, people do not like the output, what will happen then? The system will collapse because people won't accept the output. But you say that political system means authoritative allocation of values, that is nobody can challenge it. Yet there is a challenge, we do not accept the output, so what will happen? Here you came up with another concept, and you say this is called feedback. So feedback is something that comes out of output back to your input. It is a stream, so that if people are not happy with certain policy decision, they can show there is a way for them to give input for to change that output. Let's say if you are not happy with agricultural bills, you the feedback in the forms of protest, which is allowed legally, is coming, so that the government knows, the system knows that okay, maybe our output decision, that is policy decision, is not yet favorable, so we have to do some changes with the output. If that makes sense, so they are able to answer everything. But traditionalists will say that you are making things unnecessarily complicated. Yet they would say that the system theory has certain kind of relevance. In what category? In the category of data collection. In data collection, you can quickly analyze what data are you missing, what further data do you need. So let's say if a policy decision that agricultural bills have been passed, I can collect data, how many people do not support it, how many people are not happy with it, and then on the basis of that data and this system, I can understand, okay, then there must be a revolution or a protest coming up soon, because there is a huge outcry, and all the paths, all the legal paths, all the easy paths of feedback are gone. Let's say if a government passes a bill, first it circulates it among people, so that people can give a feedback as to what this bill should have as a change. But you are directly passing the bill, you have not given the scope for a feedback. What will happen? Obviously revolution or protest. So that was, this is how you take, this is just a random example I'm giving, okay, do not take it or write it. So if that makes sense, let's try to understand one more limitations, because in our syllabus we have to do limitations also. Limitations of comparative politics. So we will keep on doing that side by side whenever we do any approach. So let's see how would Marxists mm, behave. So Marxists would say that we do not believe it to be even correct. We do not believe that it is even correct at all. We think that it is a conspiracy. And understand why they say that it is a conspiracy. The times were just after World War II, so that is the Cold War times. That is, there are two blocks, capitalist bloc, socialist bloc. And understand what happened. These behavioral tendencies, these behavioralists, that is science, this is all a Western notion, Western emphasis. And when I say West, particularly USA political scientists from USA. Now they are taking up, let's say, they are dominating political science with their sociological tendencies and their scientific tendencies. And what they are attempting to do, they are attempting to come up with justifications, whatever they can, input, output, feedback. Now, in this justification, it can completely be visible that a country socialist country or a socialist system will lead to revolution, or let's say it will just collapse. That is, they are saying basically that their way is the best way. What is their way? Liberal way or the democratic ways. That is what they are giving. So they say that this is just a conspiracy by the West against socialist countries. That is it. So even if the other theories that you can see, let's say the elitist theory of democracy, if you think about it, even that is nothing but what? A justification for why democracy is the best, liberal values are the best. How? They are saying that there is this law called the law of oligarchy, which means that whatever be the country or the system, whatever be the political system, the power will be in the hands of the oligarch, that is few rich, whether you are socialist, whether you are capitalist. So if power is in the hands of few rich, whether you are capitalist or socialist, it is better to be capitalist because here you are less exploited. You can be more free here. You have more freedom to develop, whereas here not so good. So this is bad. Hence we win, you lose. This is what the whole political science has been after World War II. There is a clash between the communist way and the capitalist way. So we will see that. Okay. Now understand what did we see, and systems theory is a broad overview of how a system works. We did not go into a micro view, and hence the need for another version, a version 2.0, trying to fix, which is trying to fix the holes or the gaps in the systems approach. So where do we come? We come to structural functional approach. So let's see what Almond and Powell has to say. According to them, the systems approach is too general. It has no particular use case. It miss out on details. Details of what? Details of the structures not present. Details of the processes. What kind of processes? Political processes not present. So basically details are entirely absent. At the same time, we see the system is kind of a static system. It is not, the movement is not shown. There is no movement there, and it is modeled primarily upon the Western countries. So how can you apply something that is modeled upon Western countries, which themselves are all homogeneous, applicable to the entire world? Or let's not take the world, let's talk about developing countries. This is after World War II. We have developing countries now, the newly independent decolonized countries. Can we apply the model here? So answer is no. So what Almond and Powell will come up with, they will come up with a second version, a version 2.0, structural functional, and it will try to give a micro view of the functioning of the political system. When we say micro view, we can also say a dynamic view. Just remember what their issues were, that the systems approach was very static, it is very macro, very too generalistic. Too general means macro. You can only create something very general in nature if you are taking a very macro vision. So in this structural functional theory, what will be the influences? So obviously David Houston will be the influence, because they are just going to increment increment upon whatever he has mentioned. So basically they will take the systems approach as their prime approach, and they will just add details. What is their aim? The aim is simple, that they want to map the gaps, or let's say the limitations of the system approach they are trying to solve. Okay, let's see how they are doing this. According to Almond and Powell, political systems are always at different stages of development. Different stages of development. Political systems are not all static, they are always at a different stage of development. What does this mean? Let's try to understand this. If this is a political system, it will be functioning in many senses, like it is providing you with, let's say, security. A political system, whatever be it, we are saying that different political systems are at different stages of development. This is our inherent understanding. Pakistan's political system, is it as developed as India's? You get the idea? No, it is at different stage of development. We are at different stage of development. Our political system in United States of America, their political system is at a different altogether level of development. But can we say that security, see, political system does many functions. What is its unique function? Authoritative allocation of values. But yet, can we take an example like security? Will Pakistan's political system have the obligation to provide security? Yes. Political system of India, does it has the obligation to provide security? Yes. Political system of USA, does it has the obligation to provide security? Yes. So we can say that obligation to provide security is constant in all the political system. So we have to just check which structure here, what is the structure that is providing this function. The structure that is performing this function, we can call this a function. This is the system. The function is same in all three. We are just taking an example. Political system provides many different kind of functions. We are just taking a particular function, right now security, and we know that the system must be performing this function through a tool. We have named this tool a structure because we are doing uh, political science, we are doing studies, so this is the heavier name. Technically you can understand it as a tool. So the system using this tool to perform this function. Let's try to understand this structure, this tool, because this tool is present here also, here also, here also, and let's try to understand the differences between the tools, the structure that is performing these functions, because they can differ. Okay, this is the prime notion of your structural function approach. So summarizing it again, understand, all societies perform essential functions. When we say all societies, all systems perform essential function, the same thing as David Houston said that a system will perform a unique function. But here we are talking about essential function. Why? A unique function, let's say if United States provide a nuclear policy, making nuclear policy of United States. Let's say, can you say that Uzbekistan is also performing the function of providing a nuclear policy? No. Why? They do not have that caliber or capacity of having nuclear weapons, so they are not performing that function. Hence we are talking about essential functions here, because this is where we will be able to form a comparative scope of differentiation. Let's see how they detailed the input output paradigm as well. So this is your political system. There will be input, there will be output. Now what they have done is, they have let's say if there is a magnifying glass and they have just zoomed in. So they say that the inputs will be of four kinds. Input are four kinds: political socialization or political recruitment, political communication, interest articulation, and interest aggregation. This will go into your political system, and your political system will come out with an output, and the output will be of three kinds. In David Houston's terminologies, we had only two kind of output, that is your decision or your policy. Here we say that there are three kinds of outputs: rule making, rule execution, implementation, and rule adjudication. What else could be there? Nothing could be there. Let's try to see what are the structures that will be performing these things. These are things. There must be a structure that would be performing these functions, right? And we can say that every political system will have these input, every political system will have these outputs. We can compare them on structures because structures could be different. So let's say the structure for political uh, recruitment or socialization, that is you get into awareness of what things are going on. So we can say family is a structure, school is a structure. Similarly, we can say political communication, uh, the state to people, let's say communication, vice versa. So you can say Twitter or anything. So even mass media, in one ambit you can say mass media. Similarly, your interest articulation, let's say your union, doctors union or laborers union, basically interest groups. They will make sure that your interest is articulated, means it is spoken, clear cut, it has been reached the ears that it is meant for. And interest aggregation, when they aggregate interest, lot of interest, interest A, interest B, interest C, all interests clubbed in one manifesto. You know what we are talking about, political parties. Interest aggregated. Okay, so this is like Amazon of interest. Interest group is like a retail vendor. This is the transportation. Okay, and this is the consumer slash the demand producers. Similarly, here we can say rule making, who will do? Obviously, legislative, execution, executive, adjudication, judiciary. Similarly, the legislative will also have one executive, legislative, executive. Similarly, judiciary also, they will also perform these functions. Similarly, here you will have judiciary, legislative, and here you will have executive, legislative, because all three are important, if this makes sense. Okay, so if you think about what are the limitations or criticisms against it, so understand this is just a version 2. So basically all the traditionalist or Marxist limitations or the criticism that they were giving for the systems approach, they are valid here as well. They will say that unnecessary complicated you are making it. Marxist will say that you are just trying to let's say do a propaganda against socialist countries so that we can say that okay, see, liberal way is the best way. Okay, if now that is clear. So these are the two major approaches that we had to do in comparative politics: systems approach and structural functional approach. David Houston, Almond and Powell. Next, what we have to do, we have to understand or make let's say paragraph notes upon few more approaches like that of political development and its competitor, the political modernization. Okay, then we have to talk about political culture, and then we move to the your next bullet point that is in your syllabus, that asks us to study political sociology as well as political economy. Okay, then we start with state. So as time will increase, the classes will become more complex and faster. Okay, so okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow.